Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I am Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. We meet on the third Tuesdays of every month to celebrate the spoken word as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. We come with featured guests and an open mic, inviting readers of all ages. After gathering for several years at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library, since the pandemic, our thriving poetry circle has transitioned to this virtual space, and I'm grateful this allows me to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe. Being here is definitely being in one of my happy places, holding space for poetry, for community, and having much needed conversations in your company. So thanks for joining me and zooming in. As tradition goes, I'd love to know where you are joining me from. So please share in the chat. So you all must have heard of the Sufi mystic, the 13th century philosopher and poet Rumi. And I love reading Rumi quotes quite often. I have one to share now, and it goes like this. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Tell me, how often do we talk of wounds, especially those that are invisible and inside us? How often do we weep, share our hurt, our grief, and tell ourselves it is okay to not be okay, or ask ourselves, am I stressed? Am I anxious? Am I depressed? May is recognized as Mental Health Awareness Month, a national event and a timely reminder to bring attention to our emotional well-being, to realize that mental health is essential to our overall health, and that asking for help and receiving help is important. I have curated this poetry night in the theme of struggles, stigma, and sunshine, so that together we can learn our way back to practicing self-care, to embracing those who are struggling with mental illness, and to elevating our voices even further to break the stigma surrounding it. As you listen to this poem I'm about to read, I would like each of you to also respond to this question I have. How do you embrace mental health in your everyday life? Do you go on a walk, talk to a friend, write in a journal, anything that brings you healing and light to overcome the stress, anxiety, or deep grief, if you may be feeling that? So please put in a word or a phrase in the chat and listen to this poem I'd like to welcome you with. Written by Elizabeth Acevedo, this poem is titled, You Mean You Don't Weep at the Nail Salon? It's the being alone, I think. The emails, but not voices. Dominicans be funny the way we love to touch. Every greeting, a cheek kiss, a shoulder clap, a loud. It gots to be my period, the bloating, the insurance commercial where the husband comes home after being deployed, the last of the Gouda gone, the rejection letter, the acceptance letter, the empty inbox. A dream these days. To work at home is a privilege, I remind myself. Spend the whole frickin' day flirting with screens, window, TV, computer, phone. Eyes and eyes and eyes, the keys clicking, the ding of the microwave, the Broadway soundtrack I share wine with in the evenings. These are the answers. You feel me? The impetus, the why of when the manicurist holds my hand, making my nails a Lilliputian abstract. I close my fingers around hers, disrupting the polish. Too tight, I know then. Too tight to hold a stranger. But she squeezes back and doesn't let go. And so, finally, I can. Thank you. Well, I think weeping is such a solitary act, right? And I love how Acevedo brings it outside, outside of herself, outside in the public space. at a nail salon in this poem. Elizabeth Acevedo is a Dominican American poet named as Young People's Poet Laureate. And if you hear or read her work, you will find that her poetry gives voice to vulnerability, exploring issues of race, gender, social class, and trauma. And it is truly thought provoking and empowering. As we go on to celebrate Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm very happy to welcome Urvashi Bahuguna as my featured poet, whose work in poetry and essays demystifies, destigmatizes, and most importantly, normalizes mental illness. Before I bring her on, I'd like to introduce her. Urvashi Bahuguna is a poet and essayist based in the Bay Area. She is the author of her poetry collection, Terrarium, published by the Great Indian Poetry Collective, and her book of essays, No Straight Thing Was Ever Made, by Penguin. Her work has been recognized by a Tin House Scholarship, a Virginia Center for the Creative Arts Residency, an Atlantic Center for the Arts Residency, a Charles Wallace India Trust Fellowship, a Sangam House Fellowship, an Eclectica Spotlight Author Prize, and a Toto Award for Creative Writing. Her poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Passages North, Gulf Coast, The Adruat Journal, Swim, The Shore, Orion, Eclectica, Mud Season Review, U City Review, Soft Blow, The Penguin Book of Indian Poets, and elsewhere. She has been nominated for the Best of the Net and the Pushcart Prize. She's a poetry reader for Four Way Review. Urvashi, it is so lovely to have you. Can I begin by asking how are you doing today?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well today. I'm very happy to be here. I really liked how you started off our evening with the quote by Rumi and the Azvedo poem. I think, I really resonated with what you said about weeping being such a solitary activity. And I think I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I'll complete the thought. I think until I fell sick in my early 20s, weeping was a solitary activity. And then I was crying in the grocery store and at the nail salon and at the bus stop. So I just really related to that poem. So thank you for reading it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Urvashi. And if you'd like to start us off with a couple of pieces, and then we can go on to our conversation.
I would love to.
Thank you.
So the two poems that I'm going to read right now are from my poetry collection, Terrarium. And it came out a few years ago now. It's been 4.5 years, I think. So I'm in a different place than when I wrote these poems. But I think it shows like a certain part of my mental health journey. So I'm happy to talk about them. I just want to offer up a couple of, not exactly trigger warnings, but a little bit of context for what's coming up in these poems. They do address chronic depression and they address familial trauma, passed on mental illness and generational differences with dealing with mental health issues. And so I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a heads up before I started reading. This poem is called Outrun, and this is probably like the first fully formed poem that I wrote about mental illness when I was in my early 20s. I do not believe in karma or God, or the idea that I can outrun limbless demons. I'm told to subscribe to my own worth. I say, I'm good, I am kind, I am beautiful. I try again. I am loyal, I am tough, I am pretty. The nubs in my back do not break into wings. I do not ask you to understand, you who climb out of sadness like a goat a size too large. Some days and sometimes weeks, I walk away. This is what a prison break must be like. The greedy swallow of sunlight, the speed at which one turns corners, the respite. On an afternoon, it is always an afternoon. I lie back down on my blanket, my hand between my breasts, comforting mother-like, a scream caught in the chest. This poem was really born out of this experience I had where I would think that I had recovered from my depression and my anxiety because I was feeling better. I would go off my medication, and it would just feel for a few weeks like I was feeling very light. I was feeling like my old self again. And then it would just come back. And it was devastating because I would feel like a failure for not being able to keep up the good health, and I would feel cheated by life because I had overcome my illness, because I had this narrative in my head that illness was something to overcome, something to vanquish. And I think it is for some people. For some people, mental illness can be 1 or 2 bouts and it can be time bound, but that isn't the case in my life, and it took me a long time to accept that. This is a poem called We Are a Few Burials Overdue. Just a second. We are a few burials overdue. My father still wakes my mother in the dead of night screaming, catches her mid-dream. Suspended between two unreal boats, their rift washes away like anthills in rain. I think of my father's mind as fresh soil over rocky terrain. My father buried one thing every day for a long time. I imagine sometimes that he will dig out Dehradun lychees and an oak chest full of blue letters written to my grandfather. The lines of my childhood have run straight as he ensured. He doesn't understand whom or what I feel. He thinks of my mind as a hurricane in a landlocked country. He looks at me and sometimes wants to bury me too. Thank you. Monica, should I read another one, or should we do like one question first and then come back to?
Yeah, let's do one question before you go on. And thank you so much for sharing those pieces and starting off with such tenderly written but really intimate feelings. And I'd just like to quote a few lines from both of your poems that you just read. I was making a note of those as you read. From the first poem, I am told to subscribe to my own worth. And you go on, I'm loyal, I'm tough, I'm pretty. I really love how those lines have a reverberating echo sort of just inherent to them. And one of the lines which says, on an afternoon, it is always an afternoon. I think it's so poetic, but at the same time, when you're going through a difficult time, it does feel like time is not going forward, and it just feels like you are stuck in that time zone or that period for a long time. And from your second piece as well, I think the line that stays with me is, he thinks of my mind as a hurricane in a landlocked country. And I'd like to ask, how did you start as a poet? Can you trace that journey for us? And in connection to our theme for tonight, if you can also share your early experiences with anxiety and depression, especially while you were working on your collection of essays on mental health.
Sure. I'll answer those questions in 2 parts because my poetry journey started much before my mental health journey did. I've been writing since I was in school. I had an English teacher who was very encouraging of me. We had assignments that we needed to do as part of our regular schoolwork, and I always had a lot of fun writing. And the teacher noticed that. She noticed that I was letting my imagination run wild and that I was having fun with these assignments. And I think that sort of early encouragement pushed me to start thinking about it as something that I could continue doing. And I did. And I think for a long time I wrote like both fiction and poetry, especially when I was younger. But once I was in college, I found that it was only poetry that was giving me the tools to express the complexity of my life. And I started reading poets like Jane Kenyon and Linda Gregg, and of course Mary Oliver, who is, you know, a beloved of so many young poets. And I found that there was such a beauty in that language that I could relate to, and I wanted to replicate it. Not replicate their work, but I wanted to replicate that feeling that I get sometimes at the end of a poem, where it's like music is being created without the sound. It's like something is being unlocked. You know, when you're sitting and listening to live music, and like for a few seconds afterwards you're quiet, like the things inside you have been brushed away. I really like strove to recreate that feeling through my work as well. I went to I got an MFA right after undergrad, and that was when I felt sick during my master's, and I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that I was very tired. I had gone from being a very highly motivated, very hardworking person to someone who was very listless, deeply disinterested in everything, just very unhappy with the circumstances of my life, very angry. And I just didn't know what was happening until one of my classmates said to me, you know, my mother has depression, and, you know, some of your symptoms seem like that to me. So why don't you go get it checked out by a medical professional? And I did. And that was when I first got my tentative diagnosis. And it took a few more years before all my mental illnesses were diagnosed, and it became obvious that this was going to be like a chronic problem in my life. And I gave up writing for a few years while I dealt with all of that, because my mind simply wasn't a clear space, and I didn't have writing just felt like this, not a luxury, but it felt like something so difficult to take on. I thought that between work and dealing with my illness, like there was just no space for anything else. I was so tired all the time. And depression and anxiety do that to you. They like wipe you out. Several people experience chronic fatigue alongside those illnesses. And in that state of mind, at least I personally could not write. But by my mid-20s, I started getting better. And through a combination of therapy, exercise, really good, strong friendships, I got out of like a bad relationship. A lot of things turned in my favor. And when that started to happen, I realized that I wanted to go back over those years, and I wanted to write about them. I wanted to write about the relationship that had ended. I wanted to write about the fact that my female friends in particular had been such pillars of strength for me in my mental health journey. And I wanted to write about how I thought that my relationships with my family and my relationships with my childhood had complicated my experience with mental illness, and what an older generation's silence around these things costs my generation and the generations to come. And I started writing one poetry month. So it was National Poetry Month, April, I think 2015, maybe. And
It was the 30-30 challenge?
Yeah, it was the 30-30 challenge, exactly.
Mm.
And so it had been years since I'd written. I wasn't sure how it would go, but I started writing, and I was really surprised by how much the poems just kind of bubbled out of me. It was almost as if my body and my mind had been waiting for me to get to a place where I could articulate those things. And I think I wrote about 20 poems in those 30 days, and they became kind of the heart of what would become my first book. It took a few more years. I think 3-4 years later, my book was published. But yeah, I think it started in that Poetry Month, it gave me the confidence that I could still do this, that I still had it in me, that I had something to say. I thought that it was valuable to start writing about mental health. The collection's about lots of other things as well. I don't want to say that it's a one theme collection, but I think I was definitely motivated by this sense that I really want there to be less silence around this. Because at the time, in my social circles at least, it wasn't spoken about. And people were confused when I would say that I'm on medication. They were like, no, that I think there's a lot of like anti-medication bias in society. There's a lot of there's a sense in which people feel that we diagnose ourselves, we convince ourselves that there's something wrong with us when there isn't. And so I was running into a lot of those problems, and I was having these conversations all the time in my personal life, talking to friends, talking to family, talking to my partners. And for a long time, that was the work of my life. But I started thinking about the fact that I wanted to have these conversations on paper as well, and I wanted to have it with a greater group of people. And that's kind of where my first two books came out of, Terrarium and No Straight Thing. No Straight Thing is like a collection of essays on mental illness, and it dealt with all the ways in which it affects my life, my work life, my love life, my family life, how it affects my suicide risk. That I'm going to be reading from the suicide chapter in at some point today evening. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I took a long.
Absolutely, yes. All that you've shared, Urvashi, is so insightful, and I feel uh, so grateful that you're sharing this with such an openness. I think it is important that we hear these stories and hear the experiences to understand what an individual goes through and what all it entails. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And yeah, well, let's go ahead and if you'd like to share a few more pieces.
Sure, sure. Thank you for being such an attentive listener, Monica. I think that's always, it like puts me at ease. I'm sure it puts all your readers at ease, and it's a gift to have a reader who makes one feel comfortable.
That's very kind of you, Urvashi. Yeah, all I can see that everyone who's in the Zoom room listening to you is listening with all the attention and intention. So thank you for talking about this and sharing it.
Thank you. I'm grateful to this audience. The next poem I'm going to read is it's connected to We Are a Few Burials Overdue. It's called The Past and the Middle Distance Runners. The older he becomes, the faster the past runs at him, which is to say, the older I become, the faster he runs at me. For him to live in the present, I am told he must give up hope for a better past. Personally, I can't help but put my hands in that crusty mud and churn with my fingers, whose thrum he can hear when he listens very carefully. No matter how many times I make the trip, open the door to let him out, he's still in the past somehow, always spoiling for a fight or knee-deep in one. I've said I was raised a warrior, but really he raised me for the possibility of war. Throw me in a ring anywhere, and I'll land fists up, ready to battle the air, ready to strangle the thing that keeps us here, that drags us out. I was speaking earlier about how I really wanted to pay homage to my female friends who had been such a pillar of support for me during this time. And I did that in a poem called In Sickness and in Health. When my body reaches for and does not arrive, my girlfriends hold me as their own in a portico of light welding into possibility. One is young. We sleep with string on a small bed like siblings. One has a heart like a canoe and a house with a constricted staircase. I creak down in the mornings to find her with tea, readying the toast to hold together the day. One is older and knows how to leave a place without guilt, trusts me with canvas and paint, tells me there is nothing wrong you can do. When telling a vein from an illusion, a jacaranda from a stub is beyond my powers, this is their work, to lift a drop stitch, to move the needle tediously forward, looping detail in yarn till I'm ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Urvashi. Just stunning pieces and so beautifully crafted as well. Just bringing out all that you have received, and now we are receiving, and seeing all the love and care that you got and the support that you got during this difficult time. Uh, it also takes me back to one of the poetry anthologies that I was reading a while back, a poetry anthology on mental illness. And the publisher had written something in the foreword, which really I felt was so wonderful. And she said the publisher was Melissa Harmon. And this poetry anthology was called Flecks of Red.
Okay.
And it said that how acknowledging her illness allows her to take emotional ownership of all that comes with it, while freeing her mind to love beyond her diagnosis. And to quote a line from your memoir as well, which you've already mentioned it, that I cried at bus stops, in grocery stores, in libraries, on buses and planes. And just like Acevedo does, you do take this feeling out in public spaces, and you talk more about it. So you too speak and write about mental illness candidly, and it couldn't have been easy for you before you came to this point. So what was it that buoyed you up in your writing process? And is there an element of artistic therapy or creative release in writing about such challenging subjects and experiences in a such a direct way?
Those are really good questions. Thank you for asking. I think for me, yes, it was difficult, but I think the part of me that was afraid or concerned about the difficulty was a smaller part. And the other parts of me were resentful, actually. I think that when I think about like Azevedo crying in the nail salon or me crying on the street at the bus stop, I think about the fact that, yes, those scenes are out of the ordinary. I think even now, if I'm riding on a train and I see someone crying, my attention is drawn to that. I'm concerned about the person, but I also note it as unusual. Maybe one person on the entire train is crying in public. And when the initial embarrassment faded away, I realized that no, the reason that we cry in public is because we've been holding it in the rest of the time. And we are people in the world, and our pain is a part of the world. And the reason it's not acceptable to cry in public is not really because of to uphold some kind of like societal norm, but it's because people are uncomfortable with pain. They don't know what to do with it. We've been told to model strength in all these different ways, and weakness and crying are so interwoven in our imagination. And we don't like to be reminded of pain, because I think it like holds up a mirror to our own pain and all the things we do not allow ourselves to feel, all of the things that we do feel but like push back down, all of the times in our lives where we have wanted to be vulnerable and we have been shut down. And I think there comes a point where if you have been shut down enough, you are going to do the shutting down yourself. And so those thoughts were going through my head, and I said, no, I did not choose to be sick, and I deserve to be here, and I deserve to take up space as much as the other person. And if someone I grew up with, just random example, they're working at a tech firm, and they have a fairly regular looking life. They're doing well for themselves. And I don't have those things because of any number of reasons, but one of the reasons being that my mental illness has curtailed my life a little bit. That doesn't mean my life shouldn't be part of the public record. That doesn't mean that I don't want to be part of like the collective imagination as well. Like I think the more I put myself out there, the more other mentally ill or chronically ill people can envision good lives for themselves. It is possible. It isn't going to look like the life of a well person, but it will still be a good life in many cases with the right medical support and the right community behind you. So I think that was what was like buoying me up to a large extent. This just stubbornness around wanting to take up space and feeling like I had the right to take up space. In terms of artistic release, I felt that way about certain poems I've written or certain essays I've written. It's not true of all. I think some pieces are just so difficult to write, and it's not even what you would consider what I consider the most traumatic chapter that I was writing. Sometimes the most traumatic chapter or the most fresh wound, when one is writing about it, it doesn't hurt as much, and it'll be something totally random that will cause me to stumble, or I'll get like writer's block, and it'll just take me months to like climb out of it, or my vision will just not show up on the page. So I think to me it's still like a mystery. I feel like I take like 10 shots at the board and like 1 or 2 land. That's how it is with my writing, if even 1 or 2. I'm not sure about the artistic release part. I think when it does work out, it's fulfilling enough for me to keep on making the effort to chase that feeling. But I think that one way in which I do think my writing and my mental health are good for each other is that it's a place to not be able to lie to myself, because you can put things down, I can put things down on paper, and they will stare back at me, and we will get into like a little bit of a match where I have to be confronted by like, am I really telling myself the truth? Because a big part of mental illness is your brain lying to you. It's lying to you about dangers that you're facing. It's lying to you about how worthless you are. And when you put it down on paper, it's a little bit harder for your mind to win, is what I have seen. There's something that my therapist made me do recently, which I think has been helpful. I still have like negative thoughts in my head very often. And I was telling her about how I just like ignore them. And she said, well, I mean, you don't really ignore them though, right? Like you do hear them, and they do like stay on in your body somewhere. And so she said, just keep like a note on your phone. You have a negative thought, just put the negative thought down, like no analysis, nothing. And I noticed after a few weeks of doing this, just putting down, oh, they don't really hate me because they didn't walk home with me, or it's okay that she didn't call me to some party, or he's not angry because of the email I wrote, like nonsense like that. Actually, sorry, I wasn't even writing stuff like that. I was writing, he is angry at me, or they did leave me, and like, I felt hurt or whatever. And I just felt like once I put it down on paper, it had found a different destination and wasn't living inside me anymore. So in that sense, I do think that there are parts of writing that are therapeutic, but they aren't necessarily the writing that a reader gets to see, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I hear you, Urvashi. And I was just as you were talking about this, I was thinking how there is some sort of beauty we feel in unburdening ourselves on the page, and that's why the question, as in, is there anything therapeutic in writing? Because so many, uh, uh, I think, people do address this, or use this as one of the ways to treat someone. And I have often heard this, that go ahead and write something down, and writing can be therapeutic for you. And I see that as much as you have written about it, it can be a very difficult process to go through, and can be a very difficult journey. So I'm really glad that you are putting this out, and giving us different anecdotes or episodes from your life, which we can relate to. I can definitely relate to so many of these things that you've said. So thanks for doing that. And yeah, let's hear from your poem or the excerpt that you had to share with.
Sure, I'll move on to an essay excerpt. And how are we doing on time, Monica? Have I short?
We are good. I have a few more questions for you as well, but I was actually looking at the time and just making a note of it. But I also want to just take everyone's permission here, and let everyone know that I would love to be happy to extend the time a little bit if we want to go ahead. And if those who are on the open mic segment, I really appreciate you listening and staying on longer. But the the idea behind this poetry night, or every poetry night, curating it in a certain theme, is not just for the sake of entertainment or for the sake of celebrating or honoring a month, but really putting meaning behind that honoring. And I think that from all the other months that we celebrate, I think talking about mental health needs more space and more room. So if you're all okay with it, I'll let Urvashi also take her time to speak with us and share her work. Thank you so much. Yeah, Urvashi, please go ahead.
Sure. I'll try to be quick. I also am really looking forward to the open mic, and I don't want to take away any time from that. So I'll read a short section from it, my essay.
Sure.
So this is from the suicide chapter. In the wake of a high-profile suicide, there is an outpouring of opinions and emotional responses. Some from those whose lives have been touched by attempts or completions, and some who have experienced it in a second, third, or fourth-hand way, perhaps simply from the news or the grapevine. Some of the responses boil down to, "No, why? My heart is breaking. Come back. The world isn't better without you." Some responses aren't interested in the why and are more aggressive. "How could you? This isn't fair." The outpouring can be as confusing for people with mental illness as the actual death. People who would never think to check on their mentally ill friends on days when a celebrity suicide hits the news will post the earth-shattering words, "You are not alone, we are here." It is an interplanetary rescue team signing up to respond to distress signals, a service that there is presently little evidence to believe they will deliver. Anne Lamott, who's been writing about the purpose of hope and community for a long time, wrote, "Ram Dass said that ultimately we're all just walking each other home." When not confronted with the crisis of death, we often forget we're all just walking each other home. We're taught ad nauseum that we are capable of infinite strength. Brené Brown, maverick of the bravery and vulnerability age, said humans are wired for struggle. Her assertion bears out when I look at people who have surmounted circumstances greater than mine. A woman who lost her fiancé in a freak accident, and countless others who have survived and continue to navigate caste, class, racial, and religious discrimination. And yet, my despair isn't squashable, isn't some luxury I've chosen to buy into. Every time I fall ill again, I think of all the people who suggest mentally ill people should get better after a course of therapy and medication, who believe that simple relationships exist between cause and effect, between the degree of effort and quality and durability of the outcome. The threshold for suicide is lower in people with mental illness. What does strength mean in that circumstance? The amount of time a person has endured is both an indication of the length of the suffering and the amount of time they have succeeded in persisting. If facts are alleged to hold on to, studies find that overwhelmingly people who are rescued after suicide attempts go on to live full lives. They acknowledge that this isn't a uniform phenomenon. It is important to acknowledge that it isn't a uniform phenomenon. Some people go on to make further attempts, some of whom die by it. Of the 515 people who were rescued from the Golden Gate Bridge over the course of 35 years, only 35 were found by Richard Seiden to have died later by suicide. An overview of 177 studies around the world, with the exclusion of Africa, revealed that only an average of 4.2% of people who have been rescued would die by suicide in the following 10 years. Over a longer follow-up period, there is a gradual increase. A 37-year study of 100 survivors found that 13% had died by suicide in that period, but 87 were alive or had died from different causes. Hope doesn't have to be a meaningless abstraction. It can be a radical engine geared to propel a life to a different moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Urvashi, for sharing the excerpt and reading, taking time to read that. I'd like to quote a few lines from one of your other poems that you haven't shared yet. Maybe you will, but it's from the poem titled M for. Mm-hmm. And the lines are like these: teaching ourselves a new alphabet. M is always for maven or maverick and making do. Drawing deep circles with oil on foreheads. We treat ourselves with repetition. It's okay. It's okay. And I like the line from the excerpt that you read also, some of the lines that have resonated with our listeners as well, and the audience here, is that we are all just walking each other home. What a beautiful thought it is, and a line. But it's important to also realize that we always look for the cause and effect relationship in everything that we are looking at. I also would like to go back to some of the things that a few people have mentioned in relation to the first question that I had put across as how do you embrace mental health during your everyday life. And David, our tech support from Belmont Library, says prayer, meditation, exercise, good food, and good company. And someone, I think Heather Morgan, says poetry, nature, and friends support my soul. And there are so many, everybody's responded to this question. And I feel it is important for us to see that M is also for mental health. That is how I see those lines resonating with me in connection to our conversation tonight. And I came across one of your interviews wherein you spoke about gratitude and writing praise poems. So how has gratitude been central to your healing? How has the process of healing been for you? And along with writing, what would you say has had the most significant impact on your mental wellness?
I think my attitude towards gratitude is ever evolving. I think that it's my relationship with that started out by people telling me to think positively and to be grateful for the things in my life that were working. And I think anyone who has struggled knows that that can be very unhelpful advice. It doesn't, because the good things in your life don't magically make the bad things disappear, and they don't suddenly lessen that burden, especially with something that like illness that lives inside your body and you feel it, if not all the time, then most of the time. It can be very hard to keep perspective and to celebrate things. I think that for me, praise poetry, poems that really celebrate the good relationships in our life, or things in our life that bring us happiness. For me, it could be like gardening or bird watching or cooking. I think I started writing those as a way to honor them rather than as a way to like, I wasn't giving myself like a tap on the wrist. Like I wasn't like, okay, be quiet with all your grumbling. Like you have all these things to be grateful for. I was seeing, I restructured it in my head. I was like, I'm going to choose to focus on some of this stuff in its own time. And when I'm sad, I'm going to allow myself to be sad. I'm going to make space for both things. I once read a tweet many years ago that has just never left my mind. And the tweet said something like, I am most at peace with myself when I allow all my parts to exist. And I think that is just so true. And I try so hard in so many like moments of my life to like quiet some part of myself. And I decided not to. I decided to embrace the fact that on certain days and in certain moments, I am a deeply grateful person. And at other times, I'm a very angry and resentful person. I was making space for both of those things. And I found it very validating. Because I don't think anything in one's life can validate you like you can. And that's kind of where those praise poems really came from. I was realizing all these things through the process of therapy and through the process of healing, and I wanted to really put them down on paper, because my brain and the brains of many mentally ill people, we struggle to remember good things. And I wanted to make it easier for myself to do that. I didn't just want to carry the bad stuff around all the time. I wanted to make more room. I wanted to exercise different muscles in my brain, hold on to the good things, and not just hold on to them in the way that I do in my first poem, where I'm like telling myself like affirmations that I'm tough and that I'm pretty. It wasn't about that. It was about like doing the work over years and coming to the realization that, oh, this is a really emotionally healthy relationship in my life, and I want to honor it in a poem. And so many of the poems in Terrarium are love poems. And I think those love poems are also mental health poems, because so much of my well-being has come from choosing the people in my life who allow me to be well and letting go of the people who don't. What activity or that has really contributed to my mental health? I think that was your second question. I think therapy, honestly, just disproportionately has had a huge impact on my life. I don't think I had any clue how much the wires in my brain were just sending signals that I couldn't make sense of. I was just, I still have the same illness that I did like 10 years ago, but I'm so much better at interpreting it. I know exactly what is going on with me. And there are times where I do sink back into a bad depression, or my anxiety is so bad that I can't properly function. But it's nothing like it used to be, because I've learned strategies. I've made room for myself to change. I've given up on. When I was 18, I thought I would have like, a very different life from what I ended up having, because I felt sick. And I think being able to accept that through therapy has been like a huge gift to me, because I've allowed myself to imagine a different, fulfilling life for myself. Therapists, I think for me, I've had 4 really excellent female therapists over the last decade, more than a decade. And it's just been such a useful tool in my life.
Well, I think that's important to hear as well, how therapy is helpful, and getting this out through different ways, and finding your own ways, making way for expressing yourself in all different shapes and forms, I think is so integral to this process. And let's hear a few more poems, Urvashi, and we can keep going on.
Are you sure? I don't want to take away time from the open mic.
Yes, I'll let you know, Urvashi, when we are closing in. But thank you for checking.
Okay, so I wanted to read a couple of newer poems that are not in my book. I've written them in the last couple of years. So this poem, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Thelma and Louise. Some of you? Okay, some of you. All right. So I don't actually know if I can read this poem without giving like a spoiler. But it's about two women who take control of their lives. And at a very low point in my life, a few, maybe like sometime during the pandemic, I think in the first year of the pandemic, it was really hard. It was so isolating for all of us. The stress of losing people around us, just the danger, it was an absolutely exhausting time. And I told myself that I had the option to leave. And I said that, I think, because I knew that I wasn't actually in danger of harming myself, but I just needed to know that I I felt so desperate in that moment that I just needed to know that, oh, if I really can't manage, that I have the option of leaving. And that's a very dark thought, and it's not something that I would ever follow up on. But I think I wanted to write about it. I wanted to write about the fact that sometimes one feels compelled to have those thoughts because it's a way to like take control of your life, like when nothing else is in your control. So this poem is called Spent, and it's about that moment where one, I don't know, it's called suicidal ideation, like this phenomenon in which people will think about self-harm without any intention of actually going through it, but it's, you think about it as almost like a release valve. And you can like look it up after the session if you're curious to understand more about it. Spent. I'm going to Thelma and Louise the hell out of my life, into the embrace of that ravine on the edge of Texas, ravenous for that last crumb in my control. A pretty tune in my ear, I rev the car's entrails with decision. If they believed me bad, I would prove to be much worse. If they thought me lost, I would show myself lost only to everyone. Sped up, I have always been the kind of 20th century villain who turns the fate of the world over to vending machine vigilantes, who argues for throwing the babies out with the accursed bathwater. Look, I would shank the guy in the parking lot to forget all about Texas. Shank all of Texas if that's what it takes to finally make it out. It's okay if no one save a lone storytale policeman moans the way I go, loaded years left on the green felt table. The Thelma to my Louise is always on me to put the anger down. 8 years in therapy and nothing. Nothing will separate me from my desire to run further off a road I have been run off. God, I know it's stupid. I wish I cared. How can I, when I could go blank like bleach, lift like soda, and have nothing hurt anymore? So I do want to like clarify about that poem, that a lot of that poem is me trying to be true to the extremes that the mind can go to, and the way in which throwing everything away can feel so seductive. This next poem is called What Is It I'm Supposed to Do Come Sunrise, and it also deals with suicide and suicide risk. What is it I am supposed to do come sunrise? Title borrowed from Moja Kaf. Stall for night. Pop star Leslie Cheung's suicide note was written in anaphora. Many thanks, many thanks, many thanks. The days are an anaphora the clock's teeth snag on. Today, today. Miss you much, Leslie, a memorial concert where the singers and crowd sang only, Leslie, oh Leslie. We pray in anaphora. To ask once is to obscure what is being asked. O Lord, deliver me from mercy, deliver me from misery. O Lord, deliver me from myself. How could he be thankful when the world wouldn't tether him with gall, couldn't suture him with song? Every year, 700,000 of us. Leslie asked his sister why he was sad. I have fame, sister. I have money, sister. Fame, money. See how they ring like a gong. He asked, I asked. Oh Lord, many thanks for all that has been given. Oh Lord, how long till night? Miss you much, miss you much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Urvashi, for both those pieces. And I think the next question that I had about resilience and recovery, you've already in some ways answered that through your poems that you've just read, and also through the conversation we had before. But I do have a final question for you, which is, in when we think of fighting the stigma around mental health, it also in turn guides us to look at our community with care, compassion, and understanding, especially knowing that those who may be struggling are not only fighting with the mental illness, but they are also learning to cope and to recover. And that recovery in itself is a difficult journey. So, what advice would you give to aspiring poets or writers who want to share their own experiences and emotions through their work, but may be hesitant to do so?
Um, I would say that start writing about those experiences. It doesn't matter how good the piece is. It doesn't matter how much you're avoiding saying in your first few drafts. Just start writing about it. And I think that if you struggle to start, you're like, okay, I'm gonna write about this capital B big thing, and it doesn't come on the page. That's perfectly fine. I think that what I do in those cases is I go looking for writing prompts and writing exercises, and I always find those really useful. Especially during Poetry Month every year, when I do the 30-30 challenge, 30 poems in 30 days, I will often pick up exercises that I would never do otherwise. Erasure, found poems. There's new forms invented all the time. And I find that experimentation, even if it doesn't lead me to a full poem at the end, I think it leads me into interesting directions. It gets my mind thinking in different ways. Sometimes I think I was writing a poem for Poetry Month last year month, and I started writing about a button because I think it was something about take a small object and start writing about it, and it led me down memory lane, and I was writing about this incident that happened, many years ago. And so I think there's just something very unexpected about vulnerable writing. And if you can't enter directly, if you can't like dive straight in, which can be very painful and very difficult, enter through the back door, enter through a side door. You want to tell those stories, it will come, it will take time. And it's okay if certain stories don't come to the surface. Like you don't have to mind your trauma, you don't have to show every like side of yourself to the world. And I think here like a certain bit of luck also comes into play, where you may want to tell a particular story, but that story may never be published because maybe it's not your strongest piece, or maybe it never finds the right editor. Like there could be a whole variety of reasons for this. So yeah, like do it for yourself, do it for like the joy of like experimentation. Hugo House has free drop-in writing circles every week. If you guys don't know about them, they're very useful. There's a different person leading them from like month to month, and they'll give you writing exercises or just general themes to write about. And it's, I think, taking the structure away from yourself and like following someone else's lead with that, and then putting your own words to paper can be very freeing, because it takes like a little bit of the burden off. And I think a lot of like my most interesting poetry has come out of that. Um I really think that it's when I'm inspired, or there's something, something catches my attention, I'm like, oh, you know what, that's really interesting, let me think about that harder. And I think, and I don't like take many, many turns, and suddenly I've arrived at like what becomes the eventual heart of the poem. So yeah, I would just encourage you to keep an open mind, experiment, find writing groups, meetups, like a great place. Um, Hugo House writing circles, I do them all the time, and I really like them. I have a dedicated writing group. I did the Tin House workshop with them a year ago, and we still talk every week. We like celebrate everything that happens in each other's lives. It's a really beautiful space because I feel very safe in it. We all can share work that we're not sure about, work we wouldn't show to like a big audience, but that we're happy to show to 5 trusted people. I think, yeah, I think trust like a small group of people first. Trust yourself and then a small group of people. I think that's a great way to start writing wonderful work.
Thank you so much, Urvashi. All that you've said, I think it deeply connects with all of our audience listening here. You can read in the chat later, and also I think you speak with such openness and honesty. I think, and the depth of it is seen in your work as well. So thank you so much again. I think every person is affected by mental health in various ways, and I see your writing becomes that light, that ray of sunshine which enters the place where the wound is. What I mentioned in the beginning of our evening, and every word, every line, every verse, and every poem, I think, even the excerpt you read from your essay, they are pushing back against the stigma. And I hope that more people get to hear your work and find comfort and healing through it. So thanks again. And any links that you mentioned or you have on the top of your head or in front of you while the open mic is going on, if you don't mind putting that in the chat, I think that would be really helpful. You mentioned Hugo House, I think, and Tin House workshops as well. So that would be great too, as a resource for everyone.
Absolutely. I'll drop in like a couple of others as well that I know offer scholarships and are affordable. And yeah.
Perfect. I'll just quickly go ahead and open up the floor briefly for any comments from the audience before we close the segment. So I'll go ahead and post a few links of your work as well. And please, if anyone would like to speak to Urvashi, please feel free to unmute yourselves now.
I have a question about kind of, I have a relative who also struggles with similar issues, and I gathered that you did take medication at one point. I wondered like how much progress or success in dealing with your issues were you able to make without medication and just therapy alone? Or is the medication critical to the whole? My understanding of basically mental depression is like a chemical imbalance in the brain. And like you said, what you mentioned that you didn't choose to be ill was, that's exactly what true. It's genetics, it's the genes that make the chemicals, and it's like you're born with a certain susceptibility, perhaps. It's not something one chooses. And it is, in fact, there's a biological basis for it. So I was just wondering, but the brain is very plastic and you can change certain things over time. And so I was wondering how critical medication was.
I think, thank you for your question. I think I've been consistently on medication for a few years now. I was off it a little bit in the middle. I do think that for me personally, it's an important part. It helps. One of my friends describes it as like taking the edge off. And I think that that's true. I think it like reduces how much work I have to do on my own in order to be okay. It brings my health up to a level where I feel like it's manageable, and I can do the rest in therapy through exercise and through the other things in my life that bring me a lot of peace. But you're absolutely right, like, because it's something that's so fundamentally embedded within the body, I think that medication is a really important part of it. Having said that, I do know of people, like I have certain friends who deal with this without medication. They have other illnesses, not the same ones as mine. It really depends, but I think that like a lot of my friends who are on medication benefit from it, and that's really a decision that one has to come to with one's doctor and with a lot of experimentation. Unfortunately, like even figuring out which medication you need and what dosage and like those kinds of things can take a long time to figure out. I was on some medications that didn't suit me, and so I kind of went off medication entirely for a little while, and then when I came back, I found a medication that worked for me, that didn't cause side effects, that wasn't, that didn't feel like it was harming my body in some other sort of like hidden way. And I've been comfortable taking it for many years. But I think everyone has different experiences. I know people who've taken medication and had like adverse reactions, and then that experience has been negative enough to like turn them off medication entirely. But I would just encourage people, I think, to be open to what medication has to offer them.
I wanted to thank you for being so open. Most of us, whatever we face, aren't often don't get in a situation where we talk about it with other people. And so to be so open, I've been diagnosed with something as atypical acute depression, which is depression, but I function anyway. What I wanted to really jump in with is the medication. I'm currently dealing with a psychopharmacologist. And early on, she had me do a genetic test, not for family units, but for how my liver and kidneys process drugs. I have a very fast drug uptake, but I have a 12-page list that says on this side, all of these should be safe without any problem. Ones in the middle, you maybe want to be careful with, and the ones on the right-hand side of the page, you never want to give this patient for. And I just thought that was so incredibly helpful. And apparently it's a fairly recent advent in medical circles. And, because there is that thing. I mean, I take stuff now. I mean, not all of it for that in any way. I take a lot of antidepressants, but off label for other things, but I'm sure they still affect. But it's, it's one more tool. It's like everything doesn't work for everyone. And sometimes you take something and you go, no way, I'm not taking this. And yeah, that experience, which is so traumatic, that it's like, no, I'm not doing this. So I appreciate that. And I'll say enjoyed your poetry. I mean, it's tough stuff. And you actually made me change what I was going to read tonight. So, but thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your story. I think that's really helpful for everyone to hear about. And I really liked what you said about it being one more tool. I think that's absolutely correct. I think it's all about like outfitting our toolbox with everything at our disposal, and leaning on all those resources. It's not, like you said, not everything works for everyone. And we have to find the unique combination that does for each individual.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and comments for Urvashi. I think I can say on behalf of everyone that in all that we have listened to tonight, Urvashi, each of us have found healing in some or the other way. So thanks again, and I hope you've had a wonderful time reading in this space and having this conversation. I really appreciate your time and sharing. And I'll call upon you once again at the end of our open mic segment, but for now you can just enjoy and listen in.
I'm looking forward to it. Good luck to all the poets in the open mic session. I'll be around and listening. Thank you so much for having me. Okay, with that, we are going to stop recording this segment.
Those of you who are in the Zoom room, please stay online for the open mic segment of the evening. To the YouTube audience, thank you for joining in and hope to see you for next month's virtual Belmont Poetry Night. Good night.